Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is Monday, December 2nd today, and Jupiter has just entered the sign of Capricorn. This is a pretty big event. It lasts for a full year. We'll be visiting a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the beginning of Aquarius in about a year from now. So not only is it a big ingress in general, anytime a slower moving planet changes signs like that, it's a big deal because now we're welcoming that planet and a new configuration of its archetypal properties into our lives for a long time to come. And when it first enters, it can make a big splash. So one of the reasons that it makes a big splash in our lives when a planet changes signs is because in your birth chart, it is changing whole sign houses. I want to show you what I mean by this by pulling up a chart of the moment and just kind of giving you a little lesson in how you can look at your own chart to sort of decode this planetary transit. All right, so I'm just going to eliminate everything but Jupiter for the moment. I'll just eliminate everything here. All right, so you got Jupiter. Right now in the DC area, Jupiter is at the midheaven, and that's a big deal in terms of mundane forecasting and predictions, because whenever a planet ingresses into a new sign, or when we look at like the Aries ingress, the sun moving into Aries or the sun moving into Libra, in mundane astrology, when we are looking at major events for civilizations, peoples, nations and rulers and so forth, we oftentimes want to see where in the world that transit or that ingress will take place at the midheaven, meaning at sort of like at high noon. And it so happens that the ingress of Jupiter into Capricorn is literally taking place at the midheaven over DC right now. That means just in general that this Jupiter transit for the year ahead is going to be especially prominent in Washington, D.C. politics. Surprise, surprise. But it's worth noting because this is a whole separate branch of astrology that doesn't get a lot of coverage. It's very old. The techniques and methods are really rich. And it is of great significance when a planet is at the midheaven as it makes its ingress, especially Jupiter or Saturn. And again, or if you're looking at, say, the Aries ingress of the sun or the Libra ingress of the sun, and just looking at where that's going to land at the midheaven in the world. I think it was, I can't remember, it was 2016 or 15, maybe it was 15, that we had the Iran nuclear treaty that was signed, and I think President Obama was still in office. And the ingress happened, I believe, in Tehran with the sun in Libra, a diplomatic sign, at the midheaven in Iran when that treaty was just being formed or finalized in some way or something like that. So you can study these, and people do. It's not a big part of my practice, but I couldn't help but notice, like, wow, Jupiter's at the midheaven of Washington, D.C. as it's ingressing into Capricorn. That's a big deal because, it means that this is going to be this Jupiter in its fall in the sign of Capricorn is going to be very much on display. Basically, it's not a lot of news. If you watch the news, unfortunately, I don't feel like I have anything new that I could say about this. And I'm not going to pontificate about exactly what's going to happen. I would feel more comfortable just to say that, when Jupiter is in its fall, that means that oftentimes leaders will fall. We have, impeachment. I forget exactly what's happening today, but there's something that's happening today that's public, and it's a part of the next step in impeachment. It's happening as Jupiter's ingressing. So the fall of a leader, Jupiter in its fall. You can also look at Jupiter in its fall as a sign or symptom of the leadership displaying moral corruption in a very vivid way in the collective. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. You can also think about a new beginning that starts from the ground of something that is a little bit more difficult. Or, Jupiter and Capricorn, as I've said a few times in other videos I've made, can be about wanting to start fresh, but having to deal with a period of austerity, or it's a long-term plan, goal, or vision that's going to get us there. And it's got to be done with maturity, discipline, seriousness every step of the way in order to fulfill whatever the Jupiterian vision might be. So sometimes it's hope that starts in a dark place, and it's a long-term project. all of those things you may see really, those archetypal properties you may see very vividly this year in Washington politics. We're going to say probably more about that with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction coming up in January. So when you're looking at your own chart, the simple way of interpreting according to whole sign houses, and this is why it's such a big deal when a planet ingresses into a new sign and house. Because when it changes houses, of course, new topics are being activated. So let me just run through these really quick. I'm going to do this briefly. Don't worry. It's not going to be a super long thing here. But let's just begin. And I did this, like you could watch this, another version of this basically in my, here we go. Okay. So let's just take a look at this. I did a version of this in my monthly horoscopes, but okay. So if you just look at your birth chart, and when you're plugging your house calculations in, use whole sign houses. If you have an astrology program or online, if you're using a free program, plug in whole sign houses. And then what you want to do is find the house of Capricorn. Is that your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever house all around the wheel? The first house, for example, may have to do with health, a decision regarding your future direction in life. New beginnings belong to the first house, and oftentimes the subject of health in general. If you go forward to the second house, you're looking at the potential for the topic of money or finances, energy and resources, self-reliance and self-esteem. Go to the third house, you're thinking about siblings, your immediate environment, your neighborhood, things that are somehow connected to your roots. And you're also thinking about the life of the mind. If you go to the fourth house, you're thinking about home, family, roots, parents. Go to the fifth house, you're thinking about creativity, joy, pleasure, children, pregnancy, sometimes the arts. You go to the sixth house, you're thinking about hard work, labor, misfortune, sickness, fighting for something that you believe in. You go to the seventh house, you're talking about love, relationships, sexuality. Go to the eighth house, you're talking about the esteem of other people, or even the money, finances, resources of other people, debts and obligations, and also the topic of death. If you go to, let's see, move this forward a little bit. If you go to the ninth house, you're thinking about religion, spirituality, higher learning, long journeys, and religions, and even divination. Astrology was originally belonged to the ninth house. Jupiter in the 10th house, you're thinking about career or the karma around your life calling and purpose, notoriety, fame, public recognition, leaders, people who are in charge of things. Go to the 11th house, you're thinking about groups, friends, allies, benefactors, networks of colleagues and things like that. You go to the 12th house and you're thinking about a place of self-undoing and loss, sometimes also a place of anguish or confusion, feeling in exile, but also sometimes a place where by losing control of something, we gain something spiritually. So you can look like that at the entrance of Jupiter into a new house and a new sign. As it's moving into a new sign, it moves into a new house. In ancient astrology, we use whole sign houses, which is why when a planet changes signs, it's so dynamic, because it's activating a whole new set of topics. So that's a way that you can use this on your own. But what I actually want to talk about today is not so much about Jupiter and Capricorn, which I've already spent 3 whole videos on. I want to talk about the fact that this month, as Jupiter enters Capricorn, it is going to be moving into a trine with the planet Uranus. I have a few things I want to read to you, a few thoughts to help you clarify what's happening with this transit, which will be applying, which is within 3 degrees in ancient astrology. That is what's called an engagement. And it means that the energetic meeting of the 2 gods or 2 archetypal fields associated with the gods are coming to meet. When they meet, the perfected degree-based aspect, for example, when Jupiter's at about 3 degrees of 3 degrees of Capricorn, that is like the event, that's the peak energy. And then the 3 degrees after are often where the fruit falls off the tree. And sometimes there's an integrating period or just a time to really actually taste the fruit of the transit. It's coming off the vine. So a lot of people sometimes think that the event is going to happen when it's perfect, but often it's not when it's perfect, but just after it's perfect, actually, that the thing really starts to happen. Sometimes it's a little before or right as it's perfecting, and then there's a kind of tapering off or diminishing of the energy that can come afterwards. But it's not always that. Sometimes it's that something peaks at the exact transit perfection moment, and then as it separates, the actual event manifests. So there's two different ways you can really look at it. Anyway, so the Jupiter's ingress is, moving pretty quickly right now. Jupiter's moving pretty quickly because of its proximity to the sun. The closer the sun gets to Jupiter, the faster that Jupiter's going to be moving in the sky. So Jupiter's moving along pretty quickly right now. And you're going to see as the month goes on that it is going to conjoin with Uranus at about 2 degrees and 56 minutes. So check this out. And this is on December 15th. By the way, the reason that I'm doing this today is because I forgot to mention this in my monthly overview of December. I got done and I was like, I was joking online. If you follow me on Facebook, I was joking and I was like, I had this moment after I finished my December horoscope, my overview for December, where I was like, that scene in Home Alone where the mom is on the airplane and she's like, I just keep feeling like we forgot something. And all of a sudden she like sits up straight and she goes, Kevin. And it like flashes forward, and Macaulay Culkin's at home building booby traps everywhere for the burglars or whatever. So I just watched that with my daughter for the first time. It felt like a rite of passage. Anyway, Jupiter is going to conjoin or make a trine to Uranus this month, and I forgot to put it in my monthly overview, which is partly why I'm doing this video. It needs a big transit for December. The ingress of Jupiter is fine, but we're also looking at an immediate applying trine between Jupiter and Uranus, which is definitely a big deal. Happens around December 15th, right? If you're in my neck of the woods, Baltimore area, DC area, then it's happening, in the afternoon on the 15th. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can also remember, if you want to look at the trine I'm about to speak to, you can look at both the houses of Capricorn and Taurus in your birth chart to see what kinds of topics will be activated or are building up to activation already as the month begins. Now, let's just read something. This comes from a fantastic book called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. And I'm going to read you a passage from this today. This is a great way of understanding the Jupiter-Uranus dynamic archetypally. In the Jupiter-Uranus cycle, all of these, when Jupiter and a second planet enter into cyclical alignment, the coinciding events suggest Jupiter's archetypal influence to be one of magnifying and supporting the planetary archetype with an expansive, elevating quality, crowning it, as it were, granting it success, honoring it, bringing it to fruition, mediating its positive unfolding, its growth, its fulfillment, its enrichment, its cultural ascension, with a definite potential for excess and inflation. So that's what Jupiter's going to do when it contacts any outer planet, generally speaking, in terms of the historical moment it creates, but this can also be applied personally. Now, here's what Tarnas goes on to say. In the Jupiter-Uranus cycle, all these tendencies seem to interact in an especially vivid manner with the principle we have seen associated with the planet Uranus. The archetypal complex encompassing sudden radical change, creative breakthrough, rebellion against constraints and the status quo, the impulse for freedom in the new, sudden openings and awakenings, a tendency to constellate the unexpected and disruptive, and so forth. The specific nature of these two planetary principles was such that their archetypal interactions seemed to have a mutually stimulating effect that was highly synergistic. An expansively and buoyantly energizing quality characterized such eras, one that often engendered a certain creative brilliance and the excitement of experiencing suddenly expanded horizons. In world transits, the cyclical alignments of Jupiter and Uranus correlated consistently with condensed waves of celebrated milestones of creative or emancipatory activity across many fields. The conjunction of the two planets occurs approximately every 14 years. During each of these, as well as during the intervening oppositions, decisive crests of remarkably synchronous breakthroughs and innovations appeared to take place within a brief period of time in many areas of human activity. The evidence suggested that the continuing long-term cultural developments that we saw associated with the longer Uranus-Pluto cycle consistently burst forth in a more frequent cyclical efflorescence and coincidence with the Jupiter-Uranus alignments. These cyclical waves of creativity and emancipatory cultural activity occurred either as intervening crests between longer, less frequent Uranus-Pluto alignments or as climactic moments during or just after the period of the longer alignment. He's talking a lot about other alignments here that are going on as well. It's worth noting that we've just come out of a Uranus-Pluto alignment, so we are exactly in the phase that he is talking about in a sense, where there's an intermittent wave of Uranus and Jupiter in between longer cycles with Uranus and Pluto. Anyway, so Jupiter and Uranus move towards, oh wait, here we go. Yeah, okay, so that's it. Make sure I had all of that. So let me repackage that a little bit. One of the things that I think really helps when you're trying to understand what a transit will bring is to remember what ancient astrologers and philosophers thought about transits and what they represented. So I'm going to read you something from another book, very, very simple in this case, but this is a great book called Pythagoras, His Life and Teachings by Thomas Stanley. It's a compendium of classical sources on Pythagorean philosophy. We know that Plato was deeply influenced by Pythagoras. Pythagoras was said to have been influenced by the Orphics, by Egyptian priesthood, Chaldeans, the Magi, etc. So our background in astrology philosophically is really diverse and rich. Also, arguably, a lot of influence from India. But it all comes down in a sense, and we know a lot about what ancient astrologers believed through our study of Plato in the West. But it's important to reach back even further sometimes. And I just thought it'd be fun to bring up a Pythagorean sort of quote for the day, even though a lot of this is also repeated in Plato, and you'll often hear astrologers more popularly citing the lineage of Plato in astrology. Anyway, they're very similar. Of the world or comprehension of all things, Pythagoras called order from its order and beauty. So let's just start there. The world or comprehension of all things, Pythagoras called order from its order and its beauty. Now, in modern astrology, when you hear the word order, most people jump to Saturn. They say, oh, anything about order or structure must be Saturnine. It must have something to do with the planet Saturn. But in ancient astrology, this was, there wasn't one planet that had the market cornered on order. Actually, the concept of order, like the Greek concept of harmonia or the Indian concept of Rita, had to do with the inherent structure of the cosmos itself and the sense that it was good, ordered, complete, whole, truthful, engendering of our faith, love, devotion, that it was divine, that it was intelligent, that it was just. This is actually more intimately related to Jupiter than it was to Saturn in many ways, because Jupiter is the sort of the cosmocrat. As a god, he is the one that represents that moral, ethical, and even aesthetic order in the world. And so it's important to start with that. I thought this would be a good one to read because it's just a reminder that when we think about whether it's the moral order, the political order, the theological order of our life, the philosophical order of our life, what creates wholeness? And how do we align ourselves with it on all levels of our life? That's a Jupiter question. Now, it's really interesting that ancient astrologers also looked at Saturn as an important planet that had to do with the transcendental nature of reality itself. Both Jupiter and Saturn had these very deep philosophical meanings. Saturn, for example, is associated with decay, impermanence, and death. For example, you'll see in the same Pythagorean writings the idea that the material universe is constantly moving through cycles and circles of birth, generation, destruction, and death. And that there are actually certain astrological alignments that are associated with the birth of the cosmos and then with the eventual death, destruction, and regeneration of the cosmos. Now, it's not so important that we take that literally as much as it is that we understand that Saturn would play the role of the destruction of the manifest moral order of the cosmos. He plays that role because in mythology, he also represents the old order that was destroyed. And so he becomes emblematic of the end of a dynasty, the end of the dynasty of the body in death, the end of the dynasty of a kingdom and the death of the king, which is exactly what he was when Jupiter Zeus overtook him and established a new order. Jupiter is the feeling of excitement and expansion that we get when something new and a new sense of unity is being established, or even the sense of maintaining some sense of wholeness and completeness and like that. Saturn has more to do with the feeling of having been kicked out of Eden. It has to do with exile, loneliness, being lost or depressed. Saturn has more to do with the end of things, the decay or destruction of things. Why am I saying this? Because the world or comprehension of all things, Pythagoras called order, from its order and beauty. So as Jupiter is entering Capricorn, we are talking about a really deep year of reckoning with our sense of what holds our world together. There are deep changes going on, and they're not all bad. Just because it's in Saturn's sign does not mean something horrific is going to happen. It can mean that there's the end of one world that you've been aligned with, morally, spiritually, philosophically, ethically, and the installation of a new world. But it's coming through having to be sober, mature, and potentially letting go of the old world. Why is this so exciting, though? I mean, it's also exciting because as this ingress is happening, Jupiter is immediately picking up on the trine to Uranus. Uranus wants to make this change through immediate, sudden, excitable, emancipatory impulses. Uranus wants to make the change by disregarding the status quo, by throwing off the old and embracing the new, by being forceful, maybe even in people's face about it, which may not be entirely healthy. Jupiter's trine to Uranus is also rapid, it's sudden, it's fast, it develops quickly, and it has the feeling of a breakthrough behind it. So as some kind of moral, philosophical, spiritual order is being reconfigured through the maturing, sobering, difficult, impermanent reality of Saturn, which sometimes means that the moral order changes more slowly and gradually over time in the year ahead. That's being accelerated. It's like gas is being dumped on this on the wood, and it's being lit. That's Uranus, who's very Promethean. Prometheus is the fire theft, the fire thief who steals the fire, the power of the gods. So there's this desire right now to revolutionize things very quickly. Now, if we are trying to do that as a way of changing the order in our favor out of selfish interest, then we can become really rebellious, buck the rule, buck the tradition, and defy rules or boundaries that are in place to keep the moral order. So this could be kind of the symbol of highway robbery. You know, this can be the symbol of someone trying to change the system, change the rules, change the laws or codes, redo some kind of larger system of reality on all these levels we've been talking about by being rebellious, sudden, fast, disruptive, and even thieving. Uranus is associated with tricksters and thieves. Not many people know that, but that's Prometheus as well. So the potential for blinding, sudden, exciting developments where an old order is going away and a new one is coming in, amazing. But for example, one of the things that I've thought about is, and I don't want to get super political. I'd really try to stay away from it. But people, for example, on the left, left of center politically, they think, you know, if we remove President Trump from office, then it'll be good. That everyone will be happy. Sometimes what they miss is that removing him from office could present a candidate on the right that could be a better match for and actually beat a candidate on the left. You never know, right? So I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm just trying to say this is the nature of Jupiter and Uranus, where the idea of some order being shifted rapidly or suddenly, but maybe not always for the best reasons or not always with the best result. That's possible depending on what the intentions and underlying motivations are. Now, the other thing that you could think about would be that, you know, there's a sense in which, well, actually, let me read this. The next piece, the world, this is from Pythagoras again, the world was made by God in thought, not in time. Okay, that's important. First of all, let's just meditate on that for a second. The world was made by God in thought, not in time, which is to say that when we think about creation, right, when we think, oh, the birth of the universe or the birth of the cosmos, people often think about it as a linear event. Like, well, this was, this was an event that happened in time. But actually, what ancient philosophers like Pythagoras and others believed was that the universe was created as an ideal thought in the mind of God, and that concurrent with the thought of reality is time, but it's not birthed in a time-bound sequence. It's important. Why? It's important because when we want to understand the appearance of archetypes in our lives appearing like they're going to this month with Jupiter moving into a trine with Uranus, one of the things that can really help us to not get kind of seized too intensely by the moment and sort of taken over by it is to remember that these forms that appear in time and space, these symbolic patterns that emerge, are actually timeless. It's like a kaleidoscope. You're turning the kaleidoscope, and as you keep turning the kaleidoscope, the different patterns shift places, and they kind of morph and change shapes, and like that. You can kind of think about the patterns of the planets and what they entail thematically, moving in all sorts of interesting, undulating ways. But in a sense, their movement is timeless. Think about this as the kaleidoscope has always been turning. And the patterns in the end of that kaleidoscope that you're seeing, they don't have a real beginning and they don't have a real end. The movement of those patterns itself is what reality is in our material universe. So when we see Jupiter and Uranus getting into a trine as Jupiter enters its fall, it's also important to remember that we don't have to attach our sense of who we are, our worth, or our happiness so much to the fact that some kind of new moral order or spiritual imperative is coming in and really demanding lightning quick transition or something like that. If we can just step back just a little bit and recognize that these changes in order are themselves timeless and eternal, that they are the fractals, so to speak, of reality just turning, then we can find a little bit of patience and a little bit more thoughtfulness and discernment and care and mindfulness about how we move along with or flow along the river of these karmic currents. That's why we're doing this video. That's the whole point of doing it, because when we don't, then we get grabbed by these things and taken along. This is implicit in the language of Pythagoras when he tells us exactly what these archetypal forms are. They are basically ideas that are undulating and moving in the mind of God. And they have no beginning and they have no end, yet they appear to us to have beginnings and ends because their movements are governed in our world by something we call time, which is a part of the nature of this thought, right, that God is having, this elaborate, amazing thought that we call our manifest universe. Okay, listen to this part. For there are 5 figures of solid bodies which are termed mathematical. Earth was made of a cube. The cube. So if you can think of a cube in your mind's eye for a second, this is related to the element of earth. And when we see Jupiter entering its fall in Capricorn with a trine immediately to Uranus and Taurus, we're thinking about 2 earth signs. We're thinking about a challenge to some level of our greater sense of order, justice, goodness, beauty, truth in the cosmos. It's a shift in philosophy, it's a shift in belief, and it's a reordering that's sudden, dramatic, exciting. We have to explore what our intentions are. We have to be patient. Don't get swept up too intensely by it. Try to remember that even though this feels really, really new and really, really important, that in a sense it's also timeless, that we've been here in the same kind of situation more times than could possibly be counted. Because what do the yogis, the real masters of, transmigration of the soul theory, tell us? That we are also, each soul that is in this cosmos is part of one of the ideas in the mind of God, so to speak, and has been here from time immemorial without beginning. So the path of transcendence is not something that ever happens through a sequential number of events in time that we have to somehow get right. It has to do with a shift in our consciousness in relation to any amount of the rearranging of the Lego blocks that we feel like doing. We can rearrange the Lego blocks endlessly. That's what's been happening. That's what happens here endlessly. There's nothing really new here. And the larger order is never in threat here. Not really. We have to remember that right now, because we will reorder our personal universes in a much wiser and more patient, reflective way if we think about it like that. The cube means that the things that are changing are very blocky, right? So fundamental structures, we get that by looking at the fact that Jupiter is, after all, in Saturn's sign. And Saturn, although Saturn is not strictly about structures, this earthy Saturn in Aquarius does have to do with the more tangible earthy structures of our lives. So there's a real practical element to this as well. How are we practically creating a revolution of paradigm in our life? How is our faith path changing? It's a very good time for there to be an exciting revolution that brings us into deeper alignment with a revitalized sense of values and truth. So, it's a good time to be like, is my life philosophy working? And here's one way that we can tell that it's working. Do we feel connection to timelessness? When we look at life, not that I want everyone tripping out looking through a kaleidoscope, right? But like, what did our ancient mystic ancestors in both the East and the West essentially tell us was the point of life? And it was to develop a consciousness that was glowing with devotional awareness of, connection to, serve in being in service to that eternal spark that is within all of us. When we're not in touch with that, we suffer so deeply, and we're bound by the chains of time. Whereas when we come to see these cycles, these moments of great, like a gestalt in our awareness or our thinking or our moral compass, and we're realigning ourselves and all this stuff, when we see it, when we can see it as a part of the stagecraft of eternity, it takes the pressure off. And it's harder to do that when we're dealing with earthy cubes, right? Pythagoras, the element of earth associated with the cube, and Plato takes after this as well. The more cube-like it is, the more we feel, oh, no, this is real. I can tell you this. In my own moral universe, Jupiter's entering my 9th house in Capricorn, which is the house of faith, religion, etc. And I'll be taking initiation this Friday. Uranus is in my 1st house in Taurus. I'm a Taurus rising. So that configuration in my chart, let me put it up on the screen and I'll actually show it to you, because it's kind of a fun thing to share with all of you. Okay. There is a kind of announcement going along with this. So on Friday this week, I will take initiation from my spiritual teacher. I hesitate to call my spiritual teacher a guru, even though that is the name for a spiritual teacher in the Bhakti yoga tradition, because as soon as you say that, people have so many negative associations with gurus. But this is my spiritual teacher. This is like the kind of like the path of dedicating myself to being a student of this monk, this particular monk in the Bhakti yoga tradition, for the rest of my life. And not just that, but the larger tradition of Krishna Bhakti, of which I'm a part of, and my teacher's a part of, and his teachers, and so on and so forth. So as this is happening, Jupiter's hitting a trine to Uranus in my 1st house, the place of identity, self, psychology. This is the only house in ancient astrology that belongs to you, or to me in this case. Everything else has a lot, it really speaks to the environment of your life. It's like the chart is really like the ecosystem of your life, and the 1st house is really you, the player in the midst of the ecosystem. I know that might sound simplistic, but in modern astrology, we don't get that, because we think of the entire chart as like a Myers-Briggs blueprint. It's all just you and your behavior. Ancient astrologers didn't think of it like that. I think I prefer the way that they thought about it, even though I get a lot of value out of the psychological approach, obviously. Now, Jupiter's going to enter my 9th house, and basically I'm taking vows. And in those vows, I'm leaving behind the end of a more, I don't want to sound condemning, but a more materialistic or secular lifestyle. So it's like becoming a monk. So that's a Jupiter in Saturn like thing to do, because you're leaving behind something that you have pursued. There's an ending. There's a sense of something becoming more mature, more committed. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about this is when I go back to the last time that I had Jupiter in my ninth house, I was graduating from my MFA after doing an MA in English. Then I went and did an MFA in creative writing. And when I was finishing that MFA, Jupiter was in my ninth house. Jupiter was in my ninth house. And I decided to let go of the pursuit of academia. And I went into social work and then eventually astrology instead. But it was a moment of having to let go of a previous moral paradigm, a previous academic paradigm, a previous sense of what world I was in alignment with, where I was finding that sense of larger order and purpose. That's a Jupiterian thing, and how you're aligned with that. So I was facing the end of my alignment with academia and the beginning of my alignment with spiritual life. It was a very ninth house moment. So the next time Jupiter comes around, as it ingresses this week, I receive initiation from my spiritual teacher. The interesting thing is, with the accelerated, dynamic with Uranus, I'll receive a new spiritual name, and I'll be going by that name soon enough. I'm letting all of you know that in advance, because I'm also very, I guess, humbly praying that you'll support me in that. I have, some nervousness. I've not heard, a few people who have been like, oh, you're going to hurt your brand or something like this, and I'm like, yeah, but that's not what it's about for me. So, at any rate, that's an example for me personally that I thought I would share with all of you guys, because I've been meaning to announce this to you anyway. Like this Friday, I receive a new name, and that new name will be what I go by. And so there's going to be like an interim period. Maybe people refer to me as the astrologer formerly known as Adam, like Prince, but that's coming. And that's reflective of my own transit. Now, of course, you can apply the same basic logic, though, to your own life. Where is some kind of new order or new level of commitment coming through? And it may be quite exciting and exhilarating, but it may be also sort of sober and serious. It may require more maturity, or it may require that you set aside something, it also is like the end of an era in some other way. That's, I think, the most positive way of looking at this transit. But remember what Tarnas said, which is that these are generally periods where there is the potential for accelerated progress, breakthrough, defiance against, tradition or authorities. Like, this is kind of like, for me, I'm like, I don't care what people think if they don't like or don't like my new name. It's my new name. That's like Uranian. Like, I don't care. I don't, get off my lawn. I don't care what you think. But sometimes we need that. We need this burst of energy that just says it's time to shift things quickly, rapidly, with a sobering sense of maturity that's behind it. Now, the other thing that I'll just leave us with is this thought that there are, with Jupiter's trine to Uranus, it bursts through really quickly, but that does not mean that the effects don't have long-standing consequences. Meaning that this month, the choices that we make to try to revolutionize our paradigm, they have far-reaching effects, and it's something that will implement itself not always right away, but sometimes over the course of the whole next year. All right, so actually there was one more thing I almost forgot, which is to say that the Faizal dynamic between Jupiter and Uranus also matters a great deal. So this Faizal dynamic is in the Jupiter-Uranus cycle. Like, for example, let's go back to, I'm just going to show you how this works. Let's go back to the last time that Jupiter and Uranus conjoined. Oops. Oh, no, I'm still doing months. Let's do years. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So here they are conjoining basically in 2010, right? That's the opening of the cycle in 2010. 2010 is when, just so that you know, so I'm going to track my own cycle, and then hopefully this gives you a sense of how the structure of how you may track your own. Go back to 2010, look at late Pisces. You could look at this and track it by topic as well. 2010 right about that time, the Jupiter-Uranus alignment came together. And that was when I left my job as a social worker and became an astrologer. Complete reordering of my moral universe, basically. Not my moral, just my theological, my spiritual. Was a big sort of paradigmatic breakthrough. And that's, again, Jupiter referring to that larger sense of alignment with a cosmos that makes sense to us, that feels whole to us. Now you go forward from there and go to the opposition, and you can see the full moon in your life and what was changing. So if you go forward here, here is the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. This was in basically the fall of 2017, going all the way back. You can go back a little bit as well, into like, March of 2017. So around March of 2017. Well, what was happening in my life in March of 2017? Okay, well, remember when Jupiter entered my ninth house last, I was leaving graduate school and done with academia and ready to invest into my spiritual path more. Didn't know where I was going really, but that started off with social work. And then when the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction came, it led to my life as an astrologer beginning. The opposition came through, and it came time for another challenging moment of the paradigm or structure. I had let go of my participation in the world of ayahuasca shamanism and was beginning very seriously to study and practice bhakti yoga. That was during the full moon between Uranus and Jupiter. It's a breakthrough, but more like challenging another developmental moment in the cycle, but challenging the status quo. Now, what are we dealing with? We'll go forward from there, and what we're dealing with now is this continued separation from that opposition, and eventually that culminates in a trine, and the trine is happening right now. Let me just get it around. So there you go. So the trine is happening right now. The disseminating trine in the cycle of Jupiter-Uranus is where the fruit starts to fall off the vine, the productive implementation, the realization start to instantiate. In this case, in very tangible, physical, cube-like ways, right? Earthy ways. So I'm taking initiation and committing myself to a very specific spiritual teacher and spiritual path. That's the earthy nature of it, and it's the disseminating trine between the two of them. So if you can trace that cycle out on your own, look back to 2010, to the seeding moment of the paradigm shift that you may have gone through. Look to 2017 as the moment where there's a challenge to that paradigm and maybe some further alteration of it. And then if you go forward to now, you can take a look and say, okay, now there's this a disseminating trine where the recent shift that happened in 2017, now some kind of deeper, more very practical implementation of a paradigm shift is happening. And it's going to be accompanied in January by the intensity, and there's going to be real challenges involved. It's a very big shift for all of us right now, because coming right after this is a solar eclipse conjoined with Capricorn on the 25th, 26th with a trine to Uranus, and then going into January, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which can feel really sort of life or death. It's a very significant moment of change that's upon us. So that Saturn-Pluto we'll talk about again later. Won't go into that today. That's what I have for you guys today. I hope that this was interesting. Remember, I'm fundraising for the last 40 days of the year. I'm at, I think it's like 217 backers right now, en route to 400. Last year's total was 419. We're trying to get 420 backers this year, which would be amazing. So help me get there. If you appreciate this, if you pick up things you don't get anywhere else, if you feel like I offer something unique and I'm one of your favorite astrologers, or you just love listening to this channel, or even if you just listen to it once in a while and you get something good from it, please consider donating. I can't do it without you guys pitching in. When you do, you can pick up a reward reading. If you want to come study with me, ancient astrology is the bomb. It's amazing. If you know astrology already, but you've never studied ancient astrology, come check out my course in June or November of next year. You can get discounted tuition to it for the cheapest that I offer it all year round through my Kickstarter. If you're one of my current students already and you haven't taken my horary course or year 2, I'd love to have you in class again. So come, you can pick up 1, 2, or all 3 of my programs for greatly discounted costs through the Kickstarter. So, okay. Thank you so much. And sorry again that I forgot Jupiter Uranus, but wasn't it fun to take a look at? Glad we came back around to it. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye.